Joining us now, our next guest is Pistons beat writer Lauren Williams from MLive.com, joining us today on the Megacast. Lauren, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So recently what made big news with the Detroit Pistons had a home game against the Los Angeles Lakers during a free throw, a missed free throw opportunity. Isaiah Stewart, Pistons center, was attempting to grab the rebound, as was Los Angeles Lakers star LeBron James. Had an incident there where LeBron James' fist hit Isaiah Stewart's face, or as LeBron has put it, Isaiah Stewart's face ran into his fist, and it created a little bit of a skirmish. They had a rematch on Sunday night in L.A. after that. LeBron James had his version of the story, and he gave a take on it. I'm going to read this quote, and I want to get your reaction of it, as you did see that, and you were there for that game as well. LeBron said, quote, "The actual chop down was on purpose to get his arm off of me. That part was on purpose, but the point of my hand hitting his face was not on purpose. You can literally go through numerous plays in the NBA where guys were chopping down on other guys' arms or hands, trying to get them off of them. If you look at that play closely, he kind of got off balance, and when I chopped him down, and that's how his head went into my hand. So if it wasn't intentional at all, I've never been that player, and I've never ever tried to seek a face contact like that." He continued on that quote, but that's the gist of it. From what you saw and your interpretation, did it seem intentional to you? And I mean, from your conversations with Isaiah Stewart, what really flared his very visceral reaction to that incident with LeBron James?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the replays, especially when it's slowed down, you see that there's a little bit of force from when LeBron was trying to pull his arm away from Isaiah as they were both boxing out each other for that rebound. You know, I wasn't on the floor with them, so I'm not going to say whether or not it was on purpose or by accident. Yeah. But in talking to Isaiah, especially after that Clippers game, he said that he didn't feel like it was an accident. He felt that it was intentional. But I think the message that both teams have been, you know, talking about since that happened is just kind of moving on from it. It's happened, and, you know, Stewart, he really doesn't want that to define who he is as a player. He just wants to be known for his physical play, not his fighting, if that makes sense. You know, he's going to rebound hard. He's going to hustle for it. He's going to make sure he gets to the right spots on time. And, you know, Dwayne Casey also wants to make sure that he doesn't let that moment define who he is.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because it's a game against the Los Angeles Lakers. It's a game against LeBron James. Combining those two things together, there's a lot of national press and a lot of people that are having their eyes on a Pistons team that otherwise, at this point where they're at, simply aren't there. So they're not seeing Isaiah Stewart's game. They're not seeing the way that he behaves, the way he he goes about his regular business with the Detroit Pistons each and every day. You do. You're there. You're the Pistons beat writer for MLive. You're around these guys. So for those that aren't familiar with this team, don't know enough about Isaiah Stewart to really make that designation, just how far off of the norm for Isaiah was this kind of an incident that really was just a reaction to a really unfortunate contact?
Yeah, I mean, everybody that, you know, has said things about Isaiah publicly has talked about how respectful and how much of a fighter he is in terms of play on the court. And he has said in the past, especially after that dust up with Blake Griffin last season in March, you know, he says that there's a switch that turns on once he steps onto the court, and he's a fierce player. Off the court, he's probably one of the sweetest, quietest guys that you'll ever meet. Whenever we ask him questions in interviews or availability, you know, it's always a yes ma'am or no sir, or, you know, a rather quiet but thoughtful response.
We're joined by Lauren Williams, the Pistons beat writer at MLive.com, joining us today on the Megacast. And of course, in the aftermath of that situation, LeBron James of the Lakers suspended for 1 game, Isaiah Stewart for 2. In his absence, rookie Luka Garza got a couple of opportunities to start with the Pistons. And he's had a great season already down in the G League with the Motor City Cruise. Had a chance to get some serious NBA action really for the first time in the absence of Isaiah Stewart. What did the Pistons think about his game during his appearances with the main team, especially in an increased role because of the absence of Isaiah Stewart, which was really the first opportunity they got to see for significant NBA action from the rookie forward center.
For sure. I mean, one thing with Luka is that he has a bit of a steep learning curve right now. If you remember, he shed a lot of weight, so he's still kind of figuring out how to move his body in a lighter form. If you watch him up against some of the centers in the league, you can tell that he has a lot of work cut out for him just because he's still so new to the speed of the NBA game. You know, he's had battles with Bam Adebayo, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Those aren't easy feats to go up against when you're starting out in your rookie career, but he had a pretty solid game against Philly when he, you know, came in when Isaiah ran into some foul trouble early in that game back in, I believe, early November. He came out and had some pretty good minutes against Joel Embiid. So I think that they see a lot of potential in Luka Garza, but they understand that he still has a lot to learn. But you know what? He'll bring them a lot of offensive power, especially once his shooting kind of clicks into place. He was a very good offensive player for Iowa. So I think, you know, they're just waiting for the right opportunity to unleash him a little bit longer. But right now they've had some really, really competitive games against teams that made deep runs in the playoffs and are expected to make deep runs in the playoffs this season.
We're joined by Lauren Williams, MLive beat writer for the Detroit Pistons, with us today on the Megacast. Another young guy that's been very impressive for the Pistons, particularly in the G League, has been guard Saben Lee in his second year out of Vanderbilt. He's had a really impressive season down there with the Motor City Cruise. He last season was a relatively significant player late in the season in the Pistons depth chart. Off the bench. This year it's a little bit different because there's so much depth at the guard position, from Killian and Cade in the starting lineup to guys like Frank Jackson off the bench, Corey Joseph, even other guys that are kind of emerging back into the rotation now, like Hamidou Diallo. It kind of doesn't have a real great place for Saben Lee, but with the performance he's having down with the Motor City Cruise in the G League, is there a chance that we'll see him have an increased role with the NBA team as the season goes on?
You know, I think it just depends on what personnel the Pistons need at a particular time. We saw he had some extended minutes against the Milwaukee Bucks there after Corey Joseph was kind of having a bit of a rough game. And, you know, he did a really, really good job. I think it just depends on what they need at the moment. But Saben is a guy that's always ready whenever his name is called. I think what they want to look at is how his game from the G League is going to transfer over or translate into the NBA game. And, you know, so far there are a lot of really, really tough guards out there. So they want to see him become not just a scorer, but they want to see him create opportunities for his teammates.
We're joined by Lauren Williams, Pistons beat writer with MLive.com, joining us on the Megacast. And so last time we talked, Cade Cunningham still was battling his injury during the preseason and the early parts of the regular season. Killian Hayes was kind of the main focus there in the backcourt for the Pistons and really struggling. It's a different tale now. Cade Cunningham becoming more and more of that pivotal player on both sides of the floor for the Detroit Pistons after being the #1 overall pick in the draft over the summer. And Killian Hayes starting to pick things up as well. We've kind of seen in his absence here recently just how different of a team it is having Killian and Cade there in the backcourt in the regular starting lineup versus no Killian Hayes. In terms of his progress and kind of turning things around, what are the Pistons' thoughts right now on Killian Hayes, and how has that kind of changed over the last month or so, the first 20 games of this regular season, as we've seen him emerge into kind of a new role now with Cade Cunningham coming in #1 overall?
You know, they still see a lot of the potential there, especially because he does take a lot of the pressure off of Cade to be a shot creator and vice versa. So the fact that they're able to kind of push the pace a little bit more, Killian is, I guess, more of the faster of the two in terms of pushing the pace up the court. You know, whereas Cade is kind of like the setting the table type of guy. I think they see a lot of potential with the two of them, especially because on the defensive end, they've been pretty strong. You know, we saw Killian had 8 assists on Sunday against the Los Angeles Lakers there. And that's kind of what they need from him, especially if they're, focusing on Cade also being a scorer, especially with his 3-point shot struggling to fall a little bit. They want Killian to be that disher, if that makes any sense. So his court vision is just really, really starting to show up a little bit more, and I think they're pleased with that, and they see the potential. They just understand that when it comes to young guards, it's just going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, we're joined by Lauren Williams, Pistons beat writer at MLive.com. You can learn more information about all of her articles, read all of them, as well as everything from MLive on the Pistons front by visiting MLive.com/Pistons. And so the Pistons really struggling right now. 4-16 record overall. They're the second worst team in the Eastern Conference, only behind the 4-18 Orlando Magic there, and then tied with the Houston Rockets for the second worst record in the NBA. They've lost 6 consecutive games, but they're also a young team that has a lot of developing to do. That's kind of what Dwayne Casey in his coaching career in the NBA, at least head coaching career especially, has been known to be an expert in. That's his best area of expertise, really. But it's natural for fans when your team is 4-16 after being the number 1 overall, having the number 1 overall selection last year, being one of the worst teams record-wise in the league, having struggled for so many years and not really seeing that turning point yet years into the Dwayne Casey coaching era here in Detroit. In terms of job security, because of that fan dissatisfaction that can come up at this point in time, and because of the way that we're seeing these players develop, what is that status with Dwayne Casey organizationally? Are the Pistons still very much in favor of Dwayne Casey as their coach of the future, or could we see if these struggles continue, they may look to make a change leadership-wise?
I think right now we can say that the Pistons are on track in terms of where they are in this restoration, as the franchise likes to call it. This is only year 2. This roster has been together for, 1.5 years now, with the overhaul last year and then just bringing in a couple of new guys this season. So I think they understood that this team had a lot to accomplish in terms of developing its young players. I think if they had made it to the play-in, obviously that would have been great. But I think that the key right now is just making sure that they get guys like Killian and Sadiq and Isaiah and Cade, and even Saban and all of the young guys on the roster, because most of them are pretty much under the age of 26, except for Jeremy, Kelly, Rodney, Corey Joseph. So if half of your roster is under the age of 26 with experience between, 1 to 4 years, that's not really a recipe for success against teams who have been doing this for years now. If you look at a lot of the other rosters, the Pistons, I believe, are, between the 3rd and 5th youngest team in the league. And most of the players, again, on this roster haven't been playing that long, much less playing that long together. So a lot of the teams this year, especially in the Eastern Conference, have arguably gotten better. The East is a lot more competitive than it's been in the years past. And it's really hard to kind of pinpoint at this point which team might be the top team to make it to the finals. It's still toggling between the Nets, the Bucks, and, a few others that are lingering in the third to fifth positions. It's still an uphill battle. This is only year 2 of the restoration. So I think, they understand that they're on target in terms of this rebuild.
Yeah, the experience in age and in gameplay for this Pistons team is mostly in their role players, guys like Kelly Olynyk and Rodney McGruder, Corey Joseph, all of which who are 30 years old. That's the oldest players on the team are those 3. And then in terms of those key players at the top of the rotation, their oldest guy is Jeremy Grant, who's only 27 years old as well. And most of those young guys, as you said, Lauren, right around 20 years old, 20 being the youngest player age on the team for really this big 3 in the youth movement in Isaiah Stewart, Killian Hayes, and Cade Cunningham. We're joined by Lauren Williams, Pistons beat writer at MLive.com. You can read her articles at MLive.com. MegacastNetwork.com/Pistons. Just another minute with you, Lauren, before we'll say goodbye today. Right now, any stories with the Detroit Pistons that you're following along that maybe aren't getting a whole lot of talking points in the fan community or in the other sports pundit community all throughout the Detroit area and across the state of Michigan that fans should be focusing on right now in terms of this developing team?
Yeah, one thing that I'm definitely going to try and follow along with is, John Beilein's effect for the team. They brought him aboard as a special advisor to the team's player development coaches. And right now, I think in the fan universe, he might be a little bit of a scapegoat in terms of the Pistons' shooting troubles. And it's kind of, he's really the lone factor in the difference in terms of what they brought along, especially since they did bring in people who had, 30% or more in terms of being career shooters onto the team this offseason. So, I definitely want to get Dwayne Casey's take on, how long it takes for those fundamental drills that coaches like John Beilein implement into programs to actually take effect. So we'll see what he says. And we'll keep following along with that.
You can read all of Lauren's articles again at mlive.com/Pistons. Lauren, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.